Now, I think we all have those books that we love, and that's an easy question to answer. But what about the question of what are some books that formed the person that you've become? Hey, what's up, bookworms? Mike back today. Talk some of those books that were very, very formative for me as I went through my own coming of age story as a reader. Now, I want to get up front, guys, these are not my favorite books of all time. I've already done that video. You want to know my favorite books of all time? That's easy to find. One of the more popular videos on the channel, so I feel like you might have seen it already if you've been here before. No, these are books I say would form my worldview, would form my personality, would form the way that I treat others. I do think there are many books that you read at a young age that can really help form the person that you become. And I'm going to kind of take a look in my own order of life here as I went through my own coming of age with all these books. I'm going to start really at the beginning and kind of all the way until I became, a young man at the ripe age of 18 years old. That's what they say. I don't know. That's debatable. So, guys, we're going to kind of go through each one of these, talk about how old I was and why and how they formed the person that I did become today. Let's begin all the way back at 5 to 7-ish years old. I don't know. That was a long time ago. Those years were kind of starting to blend all together, I think, at this point in life. But I think when I first moved away from like picture books, and it's still kind of a picture book, but I was reading more words and stuff than just like a Hungry Caterpillar or something like that. A Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs by Judy Barrett. This was a book that just really resonated with me, I think, is because it taught me, that you always got to learn to adapt. You always got to be ready for change. And I think when you go with the characters in here, is that you can't get too comfortable because at first everything seems like a good, fun ride with what's going on. And then you see that they come through some really hardships. And I think it's one of those that kind of taught me, don't rest on your laurels, always be ready for change. Look, I am a creature of habit. I do a routine every single day that I like to follow. And I don't like change, I don't. But I'm always ready for it. You have to adapt or perish. I really think that was something that I kind of picked up off of this book. And I also think, not just really being able to change, your way of life at a whim. We moved a lot as kids. I grew up in let's just say we were below the poverty line. Parents were divorced, military family, all those things. So we moved a lot. And I think with that book, it really helped me stay positive on the outlook of, hey, life is changing again. And you just have to kind of learn to roll with it. You learn that at a very young age. I think it helps much, much later in life. Much later in life was 10 years old. 10 years old, I did read The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. We were reading this in junior high. I think it's banned now, obviously, but this was a book that I think it almost seemed like it was a rite of passage coming of age because you read it in school and it was one of those you didn't really hate. Now, I think Mark Twain's gotten a misunderstood rap because I think the guy was very, very ahead of his time. And if you actually read his books and don't just listen to the criticisms of it, you can see there are a lot of positive messages in those. For me, what I took from this book was the freedom and independence. I think at that age, you're starting to get sick of right there before you get to preteen, you start to get a little sick of your parents. You just want like a little more freedom. And I think with that book, it was about freedom and independence because you had Huck who wanted personal freedom. He wanted out from under his family, though there's a lot in life that he had. And of course, you had Jim who wanted away from slavery, So I think this book dealt with teaching me a lot of societal injustices and hypocrisy because you have a lot of people that will say all the right things, but when it comes time to practice when they preach, they're very much, not my backyard, those types. And I think this book really kind of opened my eyes to that especially adults would say one thing, do something completely different. It kind of taught me hypocrisy and how to know what kind of people were like that, that wouldn't practice what they preach. It would tell you to do the right thing, but they would never do the right thing. So really it taught me as a young man that, if you believe something, lead by example. Don't say one thing, but do something completely different. That's the message that I kind of took from this. And it's also, it's a book that taught me that we're all humans, man. Be it skin color, be it race, religion, whatever, gender, it doesn't matter. We're all humans, and damn it, let's just get over our petty differences and be kind to one another. I think that's a very important lesson to learn at a young age, and that it did teach me. This one's going to be hard for me to talk about, guys, because I can't even talk about this book without tearing up a little bit. But I would be lying if I said that Where the Red Fern Grows by Wilson Rawls was not instrumental to my own personal coming of age, because this book, we read it out loud in 7th grade, and I still to this day can't understand why they did this to us as kids. I think maybe it toughened us up a little bit. This book, look, it's the bond between humans and animals. It's something I don't feel like I didn't need a book to teach me why I love dogs, but I think this book made me understand why I love dogs. The loyalty, the friendship, the lifelong companionship. But with this, it's about the circle of life. Because of their advanced life cycle that dogs have. We have to say goodbye to them much earlier than seems fair, right? And it kind of teaches you that circle of life, that there is love and beauty and having a good time, and then there's also death and loss and things like that, and then rebirth, because most humans, they can't handle the loss. They go out and they get another pet immediately because we've just gotten so used to that companionship. And that's a book I really think that also taught me about the suppression of emotion and the challenge of expressing your feelings, I think. Because, look, I grew up Gen X. We were raised by the generation that told us, rub some dirt on it, walk it off, boys don't cry, things like that. And this book tackles a lot of those things, and it's funny because you say that and it's like you can't talk about this book as a guy without starting to cry, because I think that losing your dog is probably the one thing that can make a guy cry. Even the toughest son of a bitch on the planet, if their dog is sick or dying, they're going to fall apart. And it shows that we all have that wall that can be tore down sometimes. But to me, guys, this is the very essence of coming of age, because you learn about life and death and how your loved ones aren't going to be there forever. And it teaches it in a completely devastating way, but I still say to the day, that book right there is one of the reasons that we just learned to roll with things so much as Gen Xers, and of course the previous generation when Mr. Rawls wrote that book. It's a book I will tell you, do not read. Please do not read it because it will destroy you. But again, I'd be lying if I said that book was not instrumental in shaping the way that I look at companionship with man's best friend, obviously. Watership Down, Richard Adams. I was 13 when we read this in 8th grade. This was a book that absolutely taught me about leadership and about how your decisions can impact others. And that was one of those where I was like, look, I want to make sure that I'm not always just looking out for number one. Obviously, if there is someone that you're in charge of, and 13 years old, sometimes you got to grow up a little fast, I think, even certain lifestyles. But with this book, leadership is always going to be a really, really key one. And taking fluffy bunnies and making just such a nightmare situation was one of those things that could make me be like, okay, well, you think that everything was going to be safe because they're cute fluffy bunnies, and you see, no, it's not quite like that. And you can put those things a lot of allegory to your real life, And I think with me, home and belonging was something that Watership Down really made me appreciate, because I told you that we moved a lot as kids. And this was about the first time in life where I was like really close to getting some stability in life. We were finally in a place where, okay, it looks like we're not going to. Now, 2 years later, we ended up moving again, but it was for the first time in a while. It was the first time for like 2 consecutive years I'd lived at the same place. And that was something that I really longed for, was home and belonging. And again, like I said, coming from a military family and then a divorced family and somewhat of a dysfunctional family, something like home and belonging, needing some stability in your life is just something that I needed a place to call home constantly. Because like I said, we were always moving. And again, it's just one of those books that just made me realize I really, really need this in my life. Because I think when you grow up as a kid, that's just a norm to you. And it's just like, why am I not forming any lifelong relationships and friendships? Because I'm moving all the freaking time. So you just got to roll with it, I think, as a kid. But when I get to the next couple books, it was finally where we were at the place where I still am today. So I did get that stability. 14 years old, guys. To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. This was on our summer reading list before my freshman year of high school. And they told us they wanted us to read the first 3 chapters. So we could talk about it the first week of school. I read the whole book because it's just an incredible book. Look, with this book, it's more than just the racial injustice. That's obviously something that, of course, we need to all be enlightened upon. But with this, it was also classism, sexism, childism. I had to look it up and be like, is childism what it is actually called? No, childism is people who don't really say they just hate kids, but basically kids have no importance whatsoever. They hold no value. They're the kind of people who think that you can be 25 years old and that kid doesn't know nothing yet. And you know what? In hindsight, maybe we didn't. But what I appreciate about this book is I was treated like poor rabble my whole life, because we were. We grew up very poor. It was sucky, but we knew our station in life. And a lot of people I would be friends with them at school, and as soon as they found out I didn't live in the nice neighborhood they didn't want to be friends anymore, and that's something like that with this book. It taught me a lot of these things to kind of to look out for, to where I said, I don't want to be like that. I don't care what anyone's social structure is. If you're rich, if you're poor, whatever. If you have a different religion than me, it didn't matter to me. I wanted to make sure that I was giving everyone a fair chance as a human being. And I think with this book, I was at that age where I also think that boys are learning that not only can women do everything that you can do, they can do a lot of things better, And I think that's a rite of passage, again, for every boy he goes through in maturity and realizing, well, boys number one, girls number two, that doesn't apply anymore, especially when you're like, holding a lot more interest in girls than I used to, So it's the first book where I felt like the adults treated the kids like adults. And that's what I needed at 14 years old. I needed to feel like, okay, this dad is amazing, because I didn't have a father figure. This dad was amazing, and he's treating his kids like adults. He's respecting what they have to say. He's listening to them. He's not just like, oh, okay, I'm just gonna listen and be like blah blah blah, and just kind of listening to what they're having to tell him. And I really always loved that character for that reason. And it just taught me all kinds of things about class structure and making sure that I wasn't discriminating anything because I had been discriminated upon. I want to make sure I wasn't doing that. And again, you just think about racial prejudice, but there's much more prejudice than just the racial. And that book highlights a lot of those things. You guys know I'm not going to get too far now without Stephen King, obviously. 15 years old, my great Stephen King journey began when I watched It on ABC, the Tim Curry It, the made-for-TV movie, and I got very, very interested. Now, I grew up in a strictly Pentecostal household. My mom kind of eased off on that later in the years. But Stephen King was like, absolutely not. No Stephen King in this house. He's the devil, So I had to read It the entire summer of 1993. Now, I've talked about this at length in my how I became a constant reader video. But I had to read It that summer in secret, just when my mom was either asleep or gone. So it took me the entire summer to read that book, and it was very much just eye-opening to me because there's so many things that I learned in this book that made me be aware of things like childhood trauma and how it is going to form the adults that would become. I think everybody thinks they had a hard childhood. I think back to it now and I'm like, I would not want my kids to have the childhood that I have. And, because I feel like I was able to get past some of those things that the characters in this book were not. And it made me realize that, okay, I'm actually able to get past some of these things because you've got a new support group. You've got a group of friends that are loyal and will die for you. They would do anything for you. Finding that ride or die group like the Losers Club, that's what I think everybody needs in their life. So with this, I learned kind of about suppressing bad childhood memories. There's lots of things that happened in my childhood that I'm just like, I'd rather not even remember it. Now obviously I didn't have a supernatural thing going on like in this book, but it's one of those things you can kind of apply to your real life and think about. Everybody has bad things that happen in their childhood and they just don't think about it to a point where you're like, did that even happen? Because you just kind of bury it. The loss of innocence, I think, and having to grow up too fast. Like I said, when you're in a dysfunctional family, divorced family, or anything like that, you have one parent, you're being raised by one parent, and that one parent's working two jobs to feed you, and you're kind of raising yourself alone. You have to grow up faster than would be optimal for you. You have to grow up a little too fast. And I think all the characters in Losers Club really had to grow up too fast because of what was happening. And I related to that very, very much because there was lots of stuff I was doing at, like 8 years old. I can't even imagine my kids doing now at 13 and 10, So, it's one of those that really hits a lot of those things from my childhood. Big ones, facing your fears, and that includes bullies. And that's bullies both at home and abroad. I had a brother 6 years older than me, beat the piss out of me all the time. I like to think that it built character. At least that's what he tells me to think. But obviously, like I was Ben Hanscom in this book. I was the fat kid that got picked on like crazy, and I dealt with my share of bullies. And you do have to. It's like the beginning of Jumanji. You have to go take your licks and either fight back or they're just going to keep doing it forever, And I had my experiences with that, like Ben has with Henry Bowers, like the whole Losers Club has with Henry Bowers. I think everyone, especially Gen Xers, went through much different kind of bullying. You have a lot of online bullying today. And I'm not saying that physical bullying isn't still happening. I'm just saying that physical bullying was like it. I mean, you were going to get your ass kicked. You were going to get hit with brass knuckles or something ridiculous growing up in the 80s, I think. And this book really taught me about that, about standing up to those bullies and, friendship, loyalty, overcoming great odds if you just stick together, always having your friends back. That's something I think is a life lesson that I will never, ever forget. I think the most influential book to me of all time, and if you've been here before, you know this, Dune by Frank Herbert. 15 years old, guys, this book opened my third eye. This was my great awakening, and this formed my worldview for a great many things. I know these days, if you say you like a book or you like a movie or you like an artist or you're friends with somebody who has this belief, then that automatically means that you are too. So I get told on this channel all the time, in the same video, I get told that I'm a MAGA guy and I'm a libtard in the same video. And I try to tell people, not everyone is super political, hyper political. And the reason that I'm not is because of Frank Herbert. Because Frank Herbert taught me, do not put blind trust in leaders, especially charismatic ones, which is pretty much every politician ever. And for me, it's like the dangers of hero worship. This book taught me all of that. That's why all the time I'd be like, oh, did you see what this celebrity did? You see the celebrities got in this fight, this celebrity's got married. I don't care. Again, I have people that I respect and admire and look up to, but I never, ever am just like blind faith. Oh yeah, that's a great person. I would vote for them. It's never, ever been like that. I usually abstain from things like that. And I know it's hard for a lot of people to believe, but all the time, because in these days, the hyper-political landscape that we live in right now, everybody's like, you've got to be this or you have to be that. And they just cannot process that some of us, because of a book like Dune, just said, I don't trust any of these people. And I'm just going to kind of go about my business and control what I can't control. But with this book, guys, it's seriously overcoming fate versus free will. It's all those things like all my life, I was told, well, nobody in our family does that. They don't do the nice vacations. They don't have a nice house. They don't go to fancy dinners. They don't get to go to college. And I believed that. Until I got to a certain age where I was like, you know what? The hell with that. Just because it's always been that way doesn't mean it has to stay that way. Can I not be the one who can break that trend? Now, it took me a little longer than it usually would for most people. But that's why I went back to school in my 30s and first generation college graduate now. And I've normalized that for my kids, that this is what you do. And I think that's what the things you got to do to break the cycle is you have to be the one who makes that change. This book gave me the confidence to do that. As a 15-year-old kid with zero confidence, living in a new area, new landscape with no friends whatsoever, this book taught me so much and formed the person that I became. And I know a lot of people will say, oh, a book changed my life, and they'll just kind of mean it like kind of hyperbolic. Not with me. This book taught me so many things that I still practice 30-something years later. It's that important to me. And a lot of people will be like, really? You got all that out of Dune? Absolutely, I did. 16 years old, guys, The Count of Monte Cristo, Alexander Dumas. Now look, I'm a big, big believer in forgiveness, and I will give infinite chances. Now, when I was a much younger person, this book was kind of responsible for my vindictive side, I guess you would say. This is the book, along with Star Trek Wrath of Khan, that taught me that revenge is a dish best served cold, I think. And I would really be like, hey, I will eat that shit burger now. And I just know I'm just going to feed it to you down the line. It's one that made me kind of be patient and plot some of those things that you're going to do, but don't act upon them on impulse. Wait. But it also showed me that cooler heads can prevail, just like it does for our lead in this book. I think it's one of those things where you take time and you grow. It can transform that vindictive person you might be in danger of becoming. So again, very much part of my coming of age. And it went past 16, 17 years old of me being like, okay, no, F this person, I'm going to get you. I'm more the type now that's like, look, I sorry you feel that way. You want to squash it, we can squash it. I'll forgive you. I have no problems, just walking away and being like, hey, agree to disagree. It's not a problem for me. But there was a time where that didn't happen. But much, much later in life, I did learn, okay, yeah, let's just walk away. And if you want to make up in years past, I think of all the friendships I lost and stuff over that time period in life and made up much, much later in life. And I feel like it's therapeutic. It teaches us, to let things go. Don't hold grudges, I think. So it's one of those where you say, okay, at that time period, it taught me to be really focused on revenge, I think. But it also, over time, taught me, no, do like he did. Rest on your laurels and wait for your moment. I'm much more now the type of like, if karma will get you if you're just really, really a bad person. I don't feel like I need to go do anything. I don't need to ruin your life or something because you called me a name. But when I was much younger, I was much more of a hothead than I am now. And this book is kind of responsible for me learning to just kind of let things go. Now, the last book on here, I just want to kind of preface this by saying, I know this one's going to upset some people. This is going to have some people that flip a table, and I'm going to say, did you listen to what I just said about Dune? Because I don't feel like this book is overtly political, like a lot of people like to pretend that it is. And I'm going to say that I don't agree with everything that is in this book, but there are things in it that really, really clicked for me. And I'm not going to talk about books that were, I'm not going to just ignore books that were influential to me because it's going to make someone mad because they heard online that you're supposed to hate this book. For me, Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand really, really left a mark on me at 17 years old. I talked about how I had pretty much lived in poverty all my life. And I had been taught that that was just kind of the way that it goes. But as I was reading this book, I kind of learned, you know what? There's a lot of things she's talking about in here that I don't like. But there's a lot of things in here I'm like, well, you know, individualism, self-reliance, these are things I had to learn at a very, very young age. There's nothing wrong with being self-reliant. There's nothing wrong with taking care of yourself. No one's going to do it for you. That was something that I felt like, okay, I can kind of get with that. Coming from a divorced family, living in poverty, I didn't want that for my kids. You know, so this was the book where I started thinking, you know, this book just taught me that you can just, no one's going to give you the good life. You've got to go out and take it. And how do you take it? You work hard. That was the message that I took from this book. You work hard and you should not apologize for your success. That was what I took from this book. For me, it was like, no one's going to give it to you. You have to work hard. You have to work hard. And when you do work hard, your life's going to be better for it. And no one can take that away. They can say all they want about you. And they can be mad. They can be upset or think that you're greedy or something like that. I'm just like, look, I spent my time way down here and I built myself up to a better station in life. And I wanted my life or my kids to have a better life than I had. And this book is a big reason why I got to this stage in life. Yes, I started in a very, very low spot. But by the time I was, you know, right here in the edge of, you know, coming of age, I felt like these books had taught me everything that I needed to know to get to the point that I am now. So I know a lot of these things sound like, oh, this guy's just whining about how hard his life was. I think everyone looks back on their coming of age and thinks it was really, really hard. But it's one of those things where I am really, really happy with life right now. I am. And it's because of lessons I learned from these magnificent authors and these spectacular books. The lessons that I learned from them are the reason I got to this point in life. And I will always be grateful for that because they are the ones that really made me who I am today. So when people say, oh, you never really learned anything reading a fiction book, I disagree. There are several things about books that can change the way that you are. And during those formative years, you know, from childhood to right there before you turn 18, I think that these are the things that you are going to really, really soak in and say, that's what I want to do. That's what I want to be like. Now, obviously, there's lots of books I read, lots of horror books. I'm like, well, I don't want to be anything like that. And I might not have learned the same lessons that I applied to my real life from those like I did with these few here. So again, these aren't my favorite books ever, but these are the books I think that, you know, taught me up to the point where it was time to go out into the real world and learn some things that you can't learn from books. But you can take these morals and these things that you learned from these books and apply them to your everyday life. And I like to think that is what I've been doing for a long time. And I think that everybody does it. They just may not notice it. They may not notice that some of those books that they truly, truly love have impacted their life in more ways than just, hey, I really enjoyed that read. It really did change the way that I approach life, how I look at life, how I treat others. I think that that's something that all of us have done and all of us can learn from. And even at this age, I'm still learning things, you know. I think about all these formative years, sure, that's what's going to say, hey, I applied these all to my real life. But I'll read books still today and be like, I never really thought about, you know, kind of adapting the way that I look at this in real life. It can happen. I'm like, I think I took some things from Shogun, I think, recently that I thought, well, when I have something like that, I should approach it. Now, without seppuku, but, you know, hey, there are lots of lessons to learn in books like that. And it's something I'm going to keep doing. And it's something I'd love to hear about from you guys. I know we all have some books that are very, very influential, but what are some that you feel like really formed the person that you are, your coming of age journey? I'd love to hear about some of those books that really, really hit you that way and why. Why did they make you feel like you needed to put that into your life? I would love to hear it in the comments, guys. If you want to hit me down there, please, this is a very, very open space. Share anything. You will get no discrimination from me, guys. I think that anyone, you come in here and say, hey, you know, I love Lord of the Rings because it taught me, you know, to stick with friends. You know, that's fine. That's of course, that's a great lesson to take. I'd love to hear about it. So hit me in the comments, guys, and I will talk to you there.